There comes a moment in life when the dynamics between parents and their children begin to evolve. For many years, you dedicate yourself to raising them, guiding them, and making sacrifices for their well-being, but then, one day, you notice that something feels different. Perhaps they disregard your advice, overlook your opinions, speak condescendingly to you, or, even more painfully, make you feel like a burden. This can be deeply hurtful. If your kids have started to show you less respect than you deserve, you might experience feelings of frustration or even anger. It may tempt you to remind them of all that you've done for them and the countless years you prioritized their needs. However, the reality is that responding with anger will not resolve the issue. In fact, it typically exacerbates the situation. Instead, there is a far more effective approach to restoring their respect without engaging in conflict, arguments, or nurturing resentment. Today, I will present 6 strategies you can use when your children treat you with disrespect. These are impactful shifts and straightforward changes in your responses that can dramatically alter the way they perceive you. Some of these suggestions might catch you off guard, but I encourage you to stick around until the end. You will learn how to reclaim your role as a respected and valued person in their lives. Now let's begin. Action 1. Stop seeking their approval. One of the most significant errors parents make, particularly as their children grow older, is that they try excessively to please them. Perhaps you've caught yourself doing this, going out of your way to accommodate them, agreeing when you really want to say no, and prioritizing their needs over your own in the hope that they'll appreciate you more. But here's a harsh reality: the more you pursue their approval, the less they will respect you. Respect is not gained through self-sacrifice, it is gained through self-respect. When you consistently compromise, capitulate, and work to maintain harmony, you are essentially conveying to them that your feelings are secondary. Once they start to believe that, it becomes easy for them to undervalue you. I once knew a woman named Margaret, who was a strong and independent individual in her youth, but as she aged, she began allowing her children to make all the choices. She adjusted her plans to accommodate their needs, kept her thoughts to herself, and even overlooked their condescending remarks. "I just want to keep the family united," she once said to me, but what actually happened was her children began to undervalue her. They perceived her as someone who would always compromise, always agree, and always remain silent. She believed she was fostering harmony, but in truth, she was silencing her own voice. If your children don't show you respect, the first step isn't to insist on it, it's to begin acting as if you don't require it. Establish boundaries, say no when necessary, and express your thoughts, even if they might not like it. Because once you start valuing yourself, they'll start viewing you differently, and eventually, that respect will return to you. Action 2. Avoid arguing and instead set an example. When your kids dismiss your views, interrupt you, or treat you with disdain, your initial reaction might be to argue and remind them of everything you've done or demand their attention. But, let me tell you, that approach will only lead to years of frustration. Think about it: when was the last time you actually persuaded someone to respect you through conflict? Respect isn't won through words, it's earned through your presence, the way you carry yourself, and how you respond when others push your buttons. If you respond to disrespect with anger, all you accomplish is reinforcing their belief that they have power over you. I knew a man named Frank. A retired educator who led his classroom with authority, but at home, his adult children began to treat him as an afterthought. They disregarded his advice, dismissed his worries, and occasionally even laughed when he attempted to correct them. Initially, he retaliated, trying to demonstrate that he still merited their respect, but the more he battled back, the worse the situation became. One day, Frank decided to change his approach. Instead of fighting, he chose to listen, truly listen. He stopped pursuing respect through speech and began to conduct himself like a man who already possessed it. He spoke calmly and wisely, without the necessity of winning. Gradually, his children began to take notice. They perceived a man who wasn't desperate for their validation, who didn't feel the need to prove himself, but rather embodied strength. If your children lack respect for you, don't contest them for it. Instead, demonstrate what respect means through how you treat yourself. Maintain your dignity, communicate with assurance, and most importantly, never diminish yourself to their level. When you stand your ground with grace, they will sense it, and over time, they will follow your example. If you're still viewing this video and find these insights valuable, please comment number 2 below to show you're present, and if you haven't subscribed yet, I suggest subscribing and activating the bell so you won't miss any videos. Your support enables us to keep producing valuable content to inform and inspire you. Now, let's progress to Action 3, detach your emotional dependency. One of the most challenging lessons to grasp as you age is that you cannot rely on your children for emotional satisfaction. You might love them profoundly, and you may yearn for their love and respect in return, but as soon as they realize you need them to feel valued, the dynamics shift. When the dynamics of a relationship change, the reality is that people, especially your own children, tend to respect those who are emotionally self-sufficient. Relying on them for affirmation, affection, or attention can create pressure, leading them to feel burdened rather than appreciative. This can cause them to create distance, treating you with impatience or irritation. Ironically, the more you seek their love, the less freely they offer it. I once knew a woman named Helen, a generous mother who devoted everything to her children. As they grew older and became engrossed in their own lives, she found herself sitting by the phone, longing for their calls. When they didn't reach out, she would call them instead, sometimes too frequently. She would express how much she missed them and wish for their visits more often. However, this approach drove them away rather than bringing them closer. They began to view her calls as obligations rather than something to anticipate. One day, Helen decided to make a change. She stopped waiting by the phone and ceased calling first. Instead, she concentrated on herself, exploring new interests, socializing with friends, and prioritizing her own joy. To her surprise, her children began reaching out more frequently. They started to appreciate her time and saw her as someone who led a fulfilling life. The takeaway is clear: when you lessen your dependence on your children for validation, they will start to value your presence more. By demonstrating that you are capable of standing strong independently, they will respect you, not out of obligation, but out of genuine admiration for the life you've created for yourself. Action 4. Establish and uphold boundaries. A significant reason children may lose respect for their parents is that the parents allow it to happen. If you permit your children to speak to you disrespectfully, dismiss your views, or treat your time and feelings as insignificant, they are likely to continue this behavior. This does not mean they are bad individuals. Instead, it reflects the reality that people, especially family, will treat you according to the standards you set. Establishing boundaries does not equate to severing ties with your children or instigating conflict. It involves calmly and firmly determining what behaviors you will and will not tolerate and, importantly, enforcing those boundaries. When they are crossed, I recall a man named Robert, a retired entrepreneur who devoted his life to running a business with discipline and assurance. However, he struggled with his adult children, who interrupted him during conversations, dismissed his concerns, and criticized his lifestyle. Initially, he tolerated their behavior, convincing himself that it wasn't worth the battle. Yet, over time, he recognized that each time he remained silent, he was teaching them that their actions were acceptable. One day, Robert decided to take a different approach. When his son interrupted him, he calmly said, "Continue speaking when you're ready to listen." When his daughter dismissed his opinion, he simply responded, "You don't have to agree with me, but I expect respect." As they continued to test his boundaries, he made it clear that if they couldn't treat him with basic respect, he wouldn't spend time with them. And you know what occurred? They began to listen. They initially resisted, but eventually, they realized their father wasn't backing down. They recognized that he valued himself enough to demand respect, and as a result, they began to offer it back. If your children don't respect you, it's essential to reflect on whether you are permitting it. Because if you don't establish boundaries, they won't create them on their own. If you don't advocate for yourself, no one else will. If you're still watching this video and finding these insights meaningful, please comment on the number 4 below to show you're here. If you haven't subscribed yet, I suggest you do so and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any future videos. Your support allows us to continue producing valuable content to inform and inspire you. Now, let's proceed to Action 5, Stop giving without receiving appreciation. One of the fastest ways to lose respect is to keep giving to those who don't value it. As parents, we often do this more than we realize, offering our time, energy, and support even when it goes unacknowledged, taken for granted, or met with nothing but entitlement. Here's the reality: when you give to someone who doesn't appreciate it, you don't foster love or respect, you create expectation. They begin to view your kindness as something they deserve rather than something precious. When you cease giving, they don't feel grateful, they feel put out. I once knew a man named George, a father who had always extended his generosity to his children. He financially supported them whenever they needed help, dropped everything to assist them, and even adjusted his life to meet their demands. Yet, instead of receiving gratitude, he encountered complaints. They never expressed thanks, they simply expected more. The most disappointing part was that when he finally required their assistance, they were too preoccupied. George then made the decision to make a change one day. He stopped overcommitting, stopped helping before being asked, and most importantly, he began saying no when he needed to. At first, his kids were upset because they didn't understand why he wasn't going above and beyond for them, but eventually, they came to value his time and his efforts because they realized that his generosity wasn't limitless, it was a gift, not a guarantee. If you feel like your kids don't respect your time, effort, or kindness, take a step back and ask yourself if you are giving more than you should, and if so, what would happen if you stopped? Because when you teach people that your generosity is conditional on respect, they will start treating it that way. Action 6. Build a life outside of them. As parents, it's natural to commit ourselves to our children in order to make them happy. This is one of the most effective techniques to win back your children's respect. The focus of our lives can shift as we age, and if you have dedicated your entire life to prioritizing your children, they may start to view you as someone without their own life. People tend to respect those who have their own goals, interests, and sense of fulfillment. If your children perceive that you depend on them for entertainment, validation, or meaning, they may feel overwhelmed or, worse, see you as lacking a life of your own. I knew a woman named Eleanor, a widow in her late 70s, who, after her husband's death, invested all her energy into her children's lives by constantly checking in, offering unsolicited advice, and expecting them to fill the gap her husband left. Yet rather than bringing them closer, her actions drove them away. They visited less frequently, and their phone calls became shorter, leaving Eleanor feeling more isolated than ever. Then she made a decision. She joined a book club, began traveling with friends, and volunteered at a nearby community center, choosing not to make her children the focal point of her life. Remarkably, her children started reaching out more. They grew curious about her activities and admired her independence and self-sufficiency. If your children don't show you respect, consider whether they see you as someone leading a full, meaningful life or as someone merely waiting for their attention. When you demonstrate that you are truly living, rather than just existing, they will begin to see you in a new light. If you are still engaged with this video and find these insights useful, please comment number 6 below to acknowledge your presence. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I encourage you to do so and activate the notification bell to stay updated on new content. Your support allows us to keep producing meaningful content to inform and inspire you. In conclusion, respect is not something to be demanded from your children, it's something that can be inspired by the way you present yourself, establish boundaries, and live your life. If they have started to show you less care, consideration, or respect, don't waste your energy on anger. Instead, change your approach, stop seeking their approval, because the less you rely on it, the more they may offer it. Be an example for them, as your dignity will resonate louder than your words. Diminish your emotional dependence, for greater self-sufficiency will lead to more respect from them. Set clear boundaries because people will treat you as well as you demand to be treated. Cease giving without acknowledgement, for when generosity is taken for granted, it loses its worth. Most importantly, cultivate a life beyond theirs, as individuals respect those who have their own aims, joy, and sense of fulfillment. If you adopt these practices, something extraordinary will occur. Your children will start to regard you in a new way, not as someone waiting for their attention but as someone who commands respect simply by being true to themselves, and eventually, that respect will reciprocate, not due to demands but because you have earned it. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and share one thing you learned today and how you plan to use it in your life. Your thoughts are important to us, so don't hesitate to share them. Reading your comments gives us great motivation and encouragement. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please subscribe and share your support to help us continue creating good content to inform and inspire you. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.